Good evening. It is another edition of the Tando Channel Book Club, and we are live on Facebook and YouTube on our channel, and the time is 7:21. As is my custom, I am going to begin tonight with a quote. And this quote is from the book we will be discussing, Township Girls, the Crossover Generation. And my quote is from Chapter 6, Path of Feet Extremes by Imelda Emi Musariri. For years, I had heard that each one of us has a book in them. I believed this, but struggled with the prospect of putting the truism into action. I spent a large part of my adult life prevaricating on the delivery of my story, the main reason being fear of offending in an environment that seemed dangerously treacherous in its defense of age-old habits and beliefs. As one grows older, the strength imparted by life's experience, acquired knowledge, and some wisdom lends courage to the exploration of the secrets of the mind. But where do I begin this cathartic process? I am certain that many people believe they have brilliant ideas which they desire to turn into a best-selling work. Perfect in their own estimation, they have clearly made captive a flow of words, emotions, memories, knowledge, and fantasy. On the other hand, many have succumbed to the demands of life's final destination without answering the call of the pen or the keyboard. Often, Baba lamented that our generation were good at talking, but capable of little or no action, echoing Goethe, knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. Although uncertainty and fear circle me like vultures, the need to share my life's roller coaster ride is overpowering. Welcome, everybody. And that is a quote from Township Girls, the Crossover Generation. And tonight we have Farai with us. Farai Mpofu, who is one of the people who contributed and put together the anthology, and then Farayi Mangwende, who will join us shortly, who is one of the contributors of the anthology. So welcome, Farayi. And just because we've got two Farayis on tonight, we're going to go, Farayi Mangwende will be referred to as Fari, and then Farayi will be Farayi Mpofu, and you'll be able to catch as we go. So welcome, Farayi. We're so happy to have you with us.
Thank you for having us.
Great. So let me tell you, our viewers, a little bit about Township Girls. It's a collection which is comprising of the stories of women who grew up in two countries. So we've got Rhodesia, that's pre-independent Zimbabwe and post-independent Zimbabwe. And one of the subtitles, or the subtitle to the anthology, is the crossover generation. So this is the generation before my generation, which is known as the born-free generation, the millennials. And I was just sharing with Farayi how I am referred to as an ancestor millennial, which is a running joke we have here on the book club. So without further ado, Farayi, can you tell us about this project in terms of what your goal was, what it is? It reads like an anthology. It reads like a collection of personal essays. It reads like a memoir. How would you describe it? And what was the goal?
The goal was and is very simple because we believe it's a living project. The goal was to document, capture our lives, our life stories, our experiences, our collective journeys, and ensure that we tell these stories with our own voices, our own pens, from our own perspective, and in our own way, because we are, I think like most generations, but more so our generation, we are those people who read particular kind of books, had particular kind of exposure, and had certain defined interactions as we grew up. And some of these were designed to be normalized and internalized and made an integral part of our existence. And we ran the real risk, our generation, that this story would never be told, because we would continue, because we still, I think, are in that mind frame which says, is this really our story? Perhaps I have a different story, and yes, often we do have a different story, but who am I really? What is my authentic story? When you strip away perhaps the impact of school, the impact of the colonial regime in which we grew up, the influence it had on us, what is my authentic voice? What is my authentic experience? And only I can tell the story. And therefore it is a memoir. It is my recollection. It is Fari's recollection of growing up. Is it historically accurate? That's probably a discussion for another show. We endeavored to carry out research and ensure that we were historically accurate in what we spoke about. But I think the overriding goal was capturing my story, capturing it well, capturing it now, as Imelda's introduction causes us to focus, capturing it now, quickly, because tomorrow, as it turns out, for CCME was uncertain, and here we are. So get it down, get it captured. And we even, just to end, we even invited those who felt unable to write to give us an audio, and we will transcribe it. Give us bullet points, and we will flesh them out, because it's not easy. We were first timers in the main, doing our very best, not having a clue about genre, not having a clue about the normal constraints and enhancements about writing, simply saying, let's put it down. It's unique. We crossed over Rhodesia to Zimbabwe. Let's do it. Thanks, Selina.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. I think what struck me about the book in terms of goals, and maybe this was an unintended goal, is that the having so many first-time writers and the storytelling was also in itself a form of resistance to a previous regime and a certain elitism around literary work and literary writing. And what I found very profound is that even in many of the shorter stories, which just seem to provide at face value a chronology of somebody's life. I was born here, we moved here, we did this. There are startling little gems in terms of, if I think of Catherine Chitiyo's story when she talks about how being good at school was for yourself. It wasn't for any material gain. And it struck me, and I was like, that's actually quite a profound wisdom to say at any time to any generation, the ability to name and create success for yourself. So I felt it made me think that the book in itself and the process of writing and saying, no, we can do it differently. We can go against what we were taught was the right way, and we can reobserve ourselves from a more authentic gaze and not a colonial gaze, was a resistance in itself. And an element of restoration took place, because I think African women, by rote and by right through generation, are storytellers. They're the ones that hold that culture in terms of the values and pass that on through the stories that they share. And there's stories for different ages of your life as well. So very, very, very profound. Farayi, just to turn to you, you had the personal experience, your experience was different to Farayi, who had to think of the whole project, okay, and carry the baby and nurture the baby and then birth the baby with the other midwives. And then, in terms of the scope of that, you were kind of like an arm to the baby or that. What was that process of contributing as a writer, just focusing on your story like?
Look, it was interesting. I think my first thought process was, okay, wow, we're going to be telling our stories. My mom, well, she's late now, always used to say, you should write a book. You're gifted. You can write. You should write a book. But the whole process is very daunting. Where do you start? And if you look at your life, it's like, wow, all of 52 years of me, where do I start? Okay, 52 now, but at the time, I think I wasn't 50 yet. But where do you start, and which bits do you miss out, and what do you flesh out? Are you going to offend someone that you included them? It's so wide. So it is daunting, and it just becomes easier and easier to put it off. So thanks to Fari and Wadzi who put this together. There was a lot of pushing and bullying and cajoling, and you girls, you should create time. I have such a busy life, and all you need to do is just write one thing. You're like, okay. So again, it was that same process, that where do I even start and how do I capture everything that for me personally made me put it off. But I remember the last email, and I think Makoma Fari, you remember that what he sent. Ooh, it was like, wow. I mean, if we've ever been blasted in an email, that was it. That sort of got me down to write. And then I was like, okay, how best can I put this? So for me, I was like, okay, if I wrote a poem as opposed to a short story, I can cover so much more and exercise creative license and give snippets of the journey. And at the end of having read it, you can, get a feel and say, oh, okay, all right, I think I understand what she's trying to say, or you get the overview. So that was my thought process. And funny enough, once I decided to actually sit down and write it, it flowed, it was easy, and it literally was like, why didn't I do this a long time ago when I was supposed to? So yeah, that was my experience.
So awesome. But I have to say that process of, the daunting feeling of the blank page and where do I start, and you want me to tell my life story, how, and all of that is quite interesting about writing, because I don't know that many writers like writing as much as it is the love that causes them to stick with it, because it can be quite intimidating. So Farai, take us through the process of publishing a book like this. We've had many writers on the live, and they've only had to tell one story, one book, but you had 31 voices. And we are not talking, what do we call it, shy, wilting violets here. We're talking big names professionally, women with strong minds, and women who were brought up in the system where, whether you're talking convent, Arundel, any of those types of schools, they know their voice, right? How do you take that beast and come up with something as gorgeous and profound as this?
It's always good to hear that feedback, to say that, we did something worthwhile. So we really appreciate hearing that, and Fari being here also to witness it. It's fantastic. It's a beast which started off with over 130 emails to our contacts. Bearing in mind that the conversation around the creation of this book was under a tree, two women, myself and Patim Bofana, who ultimately didn't then contribute, saying, a cold winter morning, thermos flasks, sending our daughters off to hockey in Bulawayo. That's a 5:30 start right there, having left your home at 4:30, in your pajamas, something decent on top. And the thing was, so we were doing this 20, 30, 40 years ago. How did our parents manage this? We certainly didn't live where we're living now. We certainly didn't have cars that are as new as we have now. And the zoning laws and everything that goes with that. How did we even have hockey sticks when you look at the household budget and the many, many demands on it? So the goal, yes, was to write, but there was a sub goal, which was to celebrate these parents and what they achieved in the times in which they lived, and the huge ambitions that they had, especially and including for their daughters, which is very fashionable to speak about now, the girl child around every corner. But they knew this, they understood it, it was intrinsic. So let's send emails to our contacts. Surely this is something which everybody will want to contribute to. Wadzi, who's been mentioned as co-compiler, and Nomsa Mwamuka, we thought, let's send emails out and see what we get back. So 130 went out and silence came back. Predictably, perhaps you might say, Selina, with your experience. So that was 2012. And then, hey, trickle. By May 2012, we had 10 contributions. And amongst them was Sisi Melda's contribution, which was near perfect. This is life. This is the story of life. This is the spiritual realm, I suppose. And then we trundle along because we're feeling energized, we're feeling motivated. This is something that people want to do. We've got 10, and maybe 10 is enough. But you know what? We sent out 130 emails. So at some point, we felt we had lost steam. But I think it was just a necessary hibernation. It's a big project, as you've already articulated. So by August 2014, this is 2 years later, we had 20 contributions, which I think by any standards is quite significant. And the guidance was, send us a chapter, send us a paragraph, send us a poem. And we undertake to publish it. It's as simple as that, using whatever format you'd like. By April 2015, we were still cajoling, as Fari said, nudging, maybe sometimes bullying, because we believed in the project and we believed that these sisters genuinely had good stories to tell, worthwhile stories to tell. So we had 23 contributions, 2015, April. 15 July 2015, Wadzi sent out a stinker. And she said, you know what, we've got enough to publish, but if you feel that, circumstances from 2012 to 2015 have prevented you from writing and other equally colorful language, we're giving you another opportunity. This is where I said, send in your audio, send in bullet points, just send it in and we will work with it. And ultimately, by February 2016, we felt we had what we needed to then say, okay, let's begin to work on these 31 contributions. Let's see how we can begin to shape them into this anthology of memories, of experiences, of living, of these amazing women who live all over the world. Raised in Zimbabwe, educated in Zimbabwe, but living all over the world. Strong voices, strong opinions. But that meant that we had formidable stories. Not necessarily from a technical point of view, but from the point of view of their ability to capture what it is they went through, living in pre-independence Zimbabwe, and then transitioning, crossing over to an independent Zimbabwe. That is when we realized, Selina, that, oh, actually, we've been so focused on getting the contributions and we have no idea where to go from here. Self-publishing, Nomsa explored that route and said, yes, these are the options. This is the route we go. But this is all happening over a period of time, because this was 2016 and we were published in 2018 in July. Going with a publishing house, what does that entail? What are the costs involved? What does the legal side say? Who owns these stories? But we also found we were getting ahead of ourselves because we were so excited about the project, and we were already thinking about, then what happens next? And then what about featuring in this environment and on this show and on that platform? So all of these things were bubbling. And then we also had now the pressure from the writers to say, oh, right, so we contributed our stories. Where's the book? After about 12 months of research, we then stumbled into the arms of Irene Staunton at Weaver. And she turned out to be the best thing for us. She loved the project. And on that basis, she said, I would love, as Weaver, to publish this project. but this is the journey we need to walk. And she was very, it was a difficult assignment. You know, a white publisher, a collection of Black girls, their stories set in colonial Zimbabwe, transitioning into independent Zimbabwe. And the best publisher you found is this wonderful white woman who I think ordinarily would be called a white liberal. But she's honest enough to say some of these submissions require a reasonable amount of work because they're written in so many voices, they're a little bit all over the place, but I do embrace the spirit of how you've written and why you've written. So let's go forward. So we went through a process of myself, because I am based in the country where the publisher is, of coordinating the editing with the contributors and managing a process which could have been fraught with disagreement and angst and unhappiness and all manner of undertones. But I think the sisters were all very mature. Some toys were thrown out of the cot, but ultimately we were always able to come back to the table, culminating in us being published with Weaver absorbing some of the costs, but also appreciating that actually the potential of 31 or now 30 contributors marketing this project has tremendous potential. This is part of the reason why we're having this conversation today with Thando. So Selina, in a nutshell, a large nut, this is the journey we walked along.
It's actually a very inspiring journey because, you know, if we think about the trajectory of self-publishing, in 2009, when Amazon was a big thing and making self-publishing a thing to be reckoned with, a lot of people still look down on it like, oh, if you're self-publishing, you're not a really good writer. And we started to see that shift, and more people started to self-publish. But there's still nothing that quite beats the respectability of getting published and noticed by a traditional publisher. And everybody and anyone in the who's who of books or culture and arts knows that Mrs. Staunton is a institution and Weaver Press is a huge, huge name. So kudos to you that you were able to get a project that was noticed by her and by that institution in itself. And I think in a sense to also give it a breath of fresh air in terms of helping people look at it differently as well. Because I personally was surprised to find that it was a Weaver Press publication and displayed so prominently and so nicely when you go there to buy it. And so if any of you who haven't read the book yet are looking for it, you can definitely get a copy from Weaver Press, and you can look up Weaver Press online. You can get their details. You can go visit them in person, or you can call and make an arrangement. And they have distributors in Bulawayo and other places in Zimbabwe as well. The book is also available through other means online, and you can just look up Township Girls and it will come up. So we've got some people who have joined us and are loving what you are saying. Arimbo Maricano from Facebook has sent us her greetings. We're happy to have you with us, Arimbo. We've got people on YouTube. The patience is incredible, describing the journey that you just took us through. Wadzanaichiri on Facebook, it's really inspiring to hear how this journey unfolded, the story behind the stories. Yeah, the story behind the stories should actually just be its own documentary, actually. You know, there's a good Netflix idea. That could be your next project. Max Manika, greetings from Diaspora. Thank you, Max, for joining us. And Sapi Bachi, this is the first Zimbabwean written book I read. Wow, that's incredible. So I also love that. I love that that is opening up new people reading Zimbabwe in a different way. So moving forward, because, you know, we like press for time, let's talk about the impact of the book. In terms of what you expected the book would be, because we're talking 2012 to 2018, That's a long time. And a lot happens in that time. And in Zimbabwe, we went through US dollars to bond notes to back to US dollars in that time. And those are kind of seismic changes for us, in Zimbabwe. And then in the rest of the world, other big things were happening as well. So in terms of what your expectations of what this baby would look like when it popped out and said, "Hi, mommy, what happened? What was that like for you? Were you surprised pleasantly? Were there some unpleasant surprises? Has this gone places you didn't think it would go? Has it shown you things you weren't really thinking about at the beginning? What were some of those experiences like in terms of impact?"
Okay. Got your back. I think it was the initial reaction when we had the launch function, which Farayi really drove, was really good in terms of a variety of a cross section of people that attended. I think we had people from embassies, we had our family, we had our friends. We did a little bit of social media pushing. And we were all pushing all our friends and relatives to buy the book. The response was really good. People were not, it's not a conventional book in the sense that like we were taught at school when you're writing prose, that you have your intro, you've got the middle, and then you have the conclusion. So I think people were used to that and perhaps expecting that. So it did present itself as a good surprise from the feedback that I got from my various constituencies. We did radio interviews, I think, at the time as well. And Farayi explained the journey, and we got onto Amazon as well. You can get it on Amazon. So the feedback was generally good, but the one thing that did come up was people felt that it was expensive, which I suppose when you're looking at maybe other publishers globally and the cost of publishing, this was a self-funded project. So yeah, I guess that was always going to come up in the sense of cost. So there was talk of exploring having it on Kindle, which would make it cheaper and more accessible. And then also just different conversations around perhaps availing it in schools so that it's a set book. As it does speak of the dynamics, I think, of our generation and just that migration from, the then Rhodesia to Zimbabwe. So on the whole, it was very positive in terms of, it was a surprise. So I prefer to think of it like a chocolate box. Those, Terry's milk chocolate, if you remember back that far. Selina, maybe you don't. Okay, celebrations then, or, yeah, so for the millennials. So it's like a box of celebrations. So you pick up one and, they all taste different. They have different ingredients. But what was crucial, what was key about the different tastes, if I may use that word, is that it was pleasant all around and had you thinking back that, okay, and just reflecting that, people actually went through this. And I think it also gave a good appreciation of our parents and the effort that they made to make us equipped, to stand and be counted and be able to hold our own in any society and wherever we go. So for that reason, I think it's mission accomplished. So yeah, I guess what remains now, and this is one of the activities that we're doing, is to reignite the energy, the marketing, the push, and to get the word out there.
Definitely. But the one thing I love about books is that you can always keep the conversation going for a very, very long time. Farai, tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've been doing recently to promote the book. Earlier, we were talking about the radio series that you're currently in the middle of, and some of those opportunities as well.
Thanks very much, Selina. There's a lot more that we should be doing. And I suppose it's one of the surprises in the chocolate box that, in fact, there are some little sections that are missing. They weren't filled. in the sense that as coordinators, we're often surprised at the lack of availability of some of the contributors to initiatives such as this. So, to arrive and having Farayi here is wonderful. There are those who are always willing and always available, and there are those who are not so available. And I guess that's the normal distribution of life, isn't it? But the surprise had been you've contributed this collection. You felt compelled to contribute, and therefore the assumption is you will feel equally motivated to promote the project. And that's not always been the case. So sometimes we find that there's a bit of drag from that perspective, and then energy levels are a little bit drained, battery is lower, and then you wait to regroup and to move forward. But that said, generally speaking, the initiatives to promote the project are positive and well received by the contributors themselves. And given the different time zones, for example, with the radio program that you're speaking about, for example, it's been a complete logistical juggling act to ensure that as many as possible participate, during waking hours when, you can put your video on and actually have somebody who's not too blurry-eyed participating in a meaningful conversation about their contribution. So radio has been a fantastic medium to have discussions of this nature. The various social media platforms also have been great and very receptive and very open to the discussion. And don't forget, we, being a little bit older than your generation, this has all been a steep learning curve. Going the publishing route, finding a publisher, producing a book online. We actually think it wouldn't have been possible prior to technology being introduced. We wouldn't have been able really to have the collection, handwritten manuscripts being, shipped and posted around the world wouldn't have worked. So we've been learning at every step of the way. So being on a lot of these platforms has been a complete learning curve, and you don't want to see how I've rigged up my phone where in the space that I'm in, the card boxes that are doing their thing here. So what has been fantastic is the willingness to embrace technology to promote our project in what to us is a non-traditional space and a non-traditional medium. And this excites us a great deal. But casting forward a little bit, I would say that beyond radio, television, and the platforms that we have available, we have in mind that Township Girls by now should have had an accompanying Township Boys edition. But we don't. And maybe that's the subject for another show in actual fact, because the energy was there at the event that Farayi has mentioned. The hands went up, volunteers were plenty. I will coordinate, I will do this, I will blah, blah, blah. And there was one quite spirited attempt, which sort of, died a natural death, and we're sure it will resurge in the not too distant future. So that's one project, Township Boys. But there's township moms, township children, and everything in the universe around us. But we also believe that there is scope for the region, for the continent, to record their stories in the same way, using whatever resources are available to them. Because as we said, these stories, the 1900s and now the 2000s, the stories have not been told from our perspective. We still talk about Chinua Achebe, we talk about Tsitsi Dangarembga, and we speak about Yvonne Vera, and we speak about her, and we speak about him. But really, flesh and blood characters like you and I should also be contributing their voice to this body of knowledge and the history of the country, because we will look back, those of, in 100 years' time, and say, hey, we don't really know what happened during this time because nobody paused to write. It's similar to when we talk about inflation and we say, I don't even remember, what was that biggest note again? How much did a loaf of bread really cost then? We didn't write it down, we didn't record it. And that was just the other day. What happened to us at birth, what our parents went through, and so on. So as I say, it requires fundraising. It requires a fully fledged foundation, called whatever it will be. And we really need to take responsibility for collecting and curating these stories and loading them up in the cloud and then seeing what happens from there. There's no hard and fast direction we are going, But these are some of the thoughts. And of course, to promote this project more widely than within Zimbabwe. But we are very, very grateful to Tando, certainly, for having us.
Well, we are so happy to have you here and to just enrich our usual Wednesday conversation, because we love the fact that so many women are starting to write about themselves and are writing their stories. And one of the things that really punctuated that for me is actually from your story, which is the first chapter of Township Girls, where you say this: people talk about role models now as if this was a new idea. But in my childhood, amazing women walked this earth and did great things, often on a voluntary basis, while still finding time to be daughters-in-law, wives, mums, women of God, community activists, politicians, etc. Our role models were tangible, approachable, remarkable in the institutions they established, some of which are still amongst us today and the organizations have endured. And I think what you've now done in this book as women is create or evolve those institutions that some of these role models you all paint. Because to me, what struck me was that all of the mothers were different. All of the parenting styles were different. And I think sometimes when, we use words like township, especially for my generation, it's one image, it's one thing. And so I was curious when I heard about the project and when I picked up the book, like, well, I mean, what can you say about the township? I mean, it's a township already, guys, come on. And then I started reading the different stories and started realizing that we're talking about different zones, and we're talking about East and South and West. And each one had a unique flavor. And each one had unique sounds. And while there are common themes and certain things that were universal to the experience, because there wasn't a bigger story in Rhodesia at the time in terms of tensions between Black and white, race, all of those things, they were actually very unique individual stories, and parents saying, no, we're going to do this. Like the fact that you did ballet, Farai, for me is like, I'm like, wow. I'm like, that is so deep. But, a couple of chapters down, you hear others talking about these stories of going to their plot every holiday to go and make sure that they were doing that and carrying on those traditions. And it's just a very interesting, very diverse, very rich and very textured sort of space. And when you spoke earlier about celebrating your parents, I think that is the thing, that's the linchpin that gave all of that diversity, because they're all people facing the same big monster in terms of, the structure that's trying to put down a certain race, but their responses to it are different. And these are some of the unsung heroes and some of the resistors that we don't often get to hear about. So a very, very amazing project. And I love what you said about the role models of these amazing women. Love, love, love that. So, Farai, talk to us a little bit about your personal perspective of publishing. So you went into it, you were like, I'm going to write a book. Then you're like, no, I'm going to write the story. Then you're like, no, I don't think I can write the story, but I'll do a poem, right? And then you did it, and then it was great. Then there was a launch, and it was fun, and now the story's in print. What was the before and after like for you?
The before, well, I think I've spoken about that already. It was just like, how do I do this? It is too much, And then once it was done, it was like, what was I scared of? It literally was like, wow, it's done, and it's something that's possible. And I'll be honest and say that, I enjoyed the experience. And at the time, I had like so much energy, and I was going to write another book, but life's journey gets in the way. But overall, it's that nice feeling of achievement, and also a legacy in the sense that your grandchildren would have something to read and understand a little bit about how you lived or how life was back then. Because I think that as Africans, we're very good storytellers from an oral perspective, but it is the writing down. And there's a quote that I've seen quite a lot of times, and I'm not sure whether I've got it quite correct. It's like a proverb, which says that until the the lion learns to tell its story, the tail will always glorify the hunter. That's kind of like paraphrasing it, but that's the general gist. So a lot of the information that's available about the times back then, it's from a white perspective and how they came to save us. So and yet behind the saving in inverted commas, there are real stories, there are real people. There were people who were front runners, there were people who were ahead of their times, there were people who were feminists but who embraced that their women are mothers. There are fathers who sacrificed a lot to ensure that our lives would not be what they had, whether it was even from people that grew up kumamisha in the rural areas, that this is not going to be my child's life, or even in the township because we were cocooned that this is where we could stay, but they aspired for greater things. So it's literally the foundation for who the average, or maybe our age group, and even like Selina, your age group, your parents came from that, and it's just telling the journey of how then people straddled the rural life. I think one of the stories talks about going kumusha my holidays, that's just what was done, and then the township life and that sense of family, that you could be 7 of you on your bed, eyes roll, that emoji, you can see it, but it's the way it was. And now you're like, heaven forbid, trying to put your kids and their 20 cousins in one room. They'd be like, hello. So it's just literally the journey of the transition and what has happened, and how we've grown in different ways, but still maintaining the sense of family. So yeah, I think for me the after is really good, in the sense that we can reflect on this, and this is what this project brought to the fore.
Yeah. Definitely. I love it. I'm a lover of nonfiction. I'm a lover of memoir. I don't think we've done enough of that in terms of African literature. And I'm so excited to see this because in some of those stories, they were actually like the outlines for books. On their own. And so, I mean, what a wonderful seed, and what a wonderful provocation to the rest of Africa right now. Because I do think when we do something, we give people permission to do the same, and people then are like, oh, okay, so I could do that. And I think that's really, really important. Like the quote I shared from Imelda's story at the beginning, where let's stop talking about doing it and let's just get on and do it. So just before we wrap up, we're going to have a reading from Farayi, but before we have the reading, just one last question to Farayi. In terms of women writing about themselves and what this means in the larger decolonization of publishing, and the arts, because that is something that was also colonized quite strongly, even in terms of how, even if you were a Black sculptor 40 years back, 50 years back, you wouldn't get the full price for your work. There was a white curator and all of that. And now, as you were referring to earlier, you've got now all of these Black women, vibrant, liberated, and now you're telling your stories. How important is this right now? And how important is it for us to see, especially in terms of everything we've been through in the last 18 months as like the world?
Selina, one of the questions I asked in a similar conversation last week, where the guest was someone I have plenty of respect for, Ella Wakatama. She was speaking about, everything you've said, Black voices, Black publishing, their space that they occupy, the constraints, the freedoms, a brilliant presentation. And the question that I asked, and I was quite surprised it was asked formally, was to say, does this space not require formal national government funding because of its importance? And for all the reasons that you've cited, that we need it, it's desirable, it's liberating, it's empowering. If women are the natural storytellers, then the stories need to be told by the women, and they need to have that support. And we've spoken about the difficulty of actually having stories written, told, recorded, etc., etc. And I found her response interesting, because they'd had a conversation, she and the Stanford professor who was moderating. And their view was, the minute you introduce centralized government support for such a project, you lose the independence, and you run the risk of losing some of these voices. And yet, I think the stage that we are here in this country, and possibly here in the continent, is that there is support needed for us to gather the momentum, harness the voices, provide the access and the resources, perhaps, to make it easy to do what we need to do. I think we as a project are convinced that this has been necessary, it's been worthwhile, it's filling, there's a need, there is a void. We've done our very small contribution to fill it, but we're nowhere near where we should be. But if there is a structure, if there's a system, if there's a process by which we can harvest these stories, you know, whether it's under a tree, whether it's a community gathering, a social gathering, then that mechanism ought to be triggered. It needs to be funded, it needs to be triggered, and we need to harvest these stories. Because certainly what I've seen is that this collection of sisters, of 31 sisters, now 30, they've been transformed through a process of writing their story, researching their story, writing the story, putting it out there. And as Farayi said, it's no mean feat putting yourself out there and saying, hey, this is who I am. There have been labels cast on the project. It's elitist. It's Masalad telling us how fabulous their lives are. But it's not. And you know that, Selina, because you've read the collection. But it's an inevitable consequence of the stories that we tell, that we lived. Yes, I danced. I anchored the back row at a ballet class every Saturday with the two other Fs, Fiona and Faith. That's the reality. But there's much more to this project. So I personally have loved the writing, and I personally am one of those who feels, having done a chapter, for, as Selina says, it certainly is the beginning, hopefully, of a bigger, wider exploration of my own life for the benefit of my country, my family, the region, the continent, and beyond. And yes, I think this project will eventually become a continental project. So we walk differently now. Our shoulders are held up, our chins are up as a result of having made these, written these stories. Thanks.
Definitely. I mean, there's a saying, we repeat what we don't repair, and those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. So for me, when I think of these stories, I'm like, it gives us a chance to deal with what needs to be repaired, whether it's in our collective psyche, because a lot of the stories do kind of reveal quite a little bit of lateral trauma, in terms of, you know, some of the things that were just not okay. You know, people not getting what they deserved, people not being given the same opportunities. But then again, there's also the triumph of the human spirit in terms of resilience, and how many found that through different kinds of faith and spirituality. Very, very interesting and very, very remarkable, and very, very powerful to pass on to the next generation, because if we look at the ones who were born into the privilege post-liberation, I think, you know, we're only starting to see the struggle through things like COVID. We're only starting to have to deal with the tough questions of life through COVID. But I think if picking up a book like this right now shows you that, like, life is hard in general, and you can actually suck it up. And there will be moments you will laugh, as much as there will be moments where you will cry. And that this is all a part of life. So, you know, very, very grateful for this gift that you've given to fellow younger Zimbabweans, and definitely looking forward to all of the places it can and will go in the future. So as we wrap up tonight, we're going to have Farayi read to us from the book, as is our custom. We always end with a reading from the authors. So we couldn't have all 31 of them, read for us. And we did pay tribute to Imelda, who did pass on at the beginning of the project, and by sharing an excerpt from her piece. Now, Farai, you give us a reading to sign us out of book club tonight.
Thank you, Selina. My poem, as I mentioned earlier, my contribution is a poem, and it's entitled Township Girl Made Good. I am what I am, a product of fusions, a tapestry of languages, cultures, continents, different, but all of them defining. A divergence of beliefs united by one cause, one goal, to be the best that one can be. My journey is that of a township girl, from Africa to Europe, a transition from sunny Africa, not by choice, but by design, to a land where the cold was so cold it fell down as a tangible mass. A land where they could not pronounce my name, a land whose language I could not speak, a land that embraced me, formed me, molded me, a land where I learned the color of your skin does not define who you are, a land that allowed you to excel as long as you could master the Queen's language. I longed for home, but Africa became a distant memory. The transition complete, my language a distant past, English befitting the Queen became my norm, only to be reversed in one fell swoop. Political freedom achieved, independence. That event determined the return back to the motherland, the euphoria, the joy, the return to my home where my language I could no longer speak, the adjustment, the teasing and taunting of my own. A reverse journey back to the beginning to relearn what is my own. This township girl no more, now a resident of the leafy suburbs, the benefits of independence, full access to what was reserved for a few, another piece in the tapestry. The journey remained the same, to be the best that I could be, taking advantage of what was now available for all. The experience, the joys, the challenges have made me who I am, a successful career woman, a mother, a friend, a sister, an aunt, one who adapts to all, a colorful tapestry of experiences, a fusion of cultures, a hybrid. The result, Township Girl Made Good.
Wonderful, lovely, 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 lovely. And I love that poem because it sums up so many of the different motifs that you'll experience when you read this delightful anthology. So one last time, if you are looking for your copy of Township Girls, it is at a very affordable price at Weaver Press. You can look up Weaver Press online. They are in Emerald Hill. They also have distributors in Bulawayo and other places. Or you can order your copy on Amazon, and let's keep the flame alive because this is definitely a story that will warm you up this winter, and it'll get you thinking as we face some of the things that we're facing right now. So thank you very much, Farai and Farai, for joining us. And thank you to all of you who joined us and shared your lovely comments on Facebook and YouTube. We will be back next week, Wednesday, at our usual time, 7 p.m. And have a lovely week. See you then. Good night, everybody. Love you all.
Thank you.